All right, what's up, guys? We've got our very first video podcast. We're also doing our usual recording. You can find us there as well. Today, we're going to be talking about strength training fundamentals and building a solid foundation. You'll notice there is a Glock 22 here. So that is the gun of this episode, Glock 22, keep it simple. Talking about building a solid foundation, really it's just like the base building portion of training. So let's say you're just getting into powerlifting, where you're coming out of your first powerlifting meet, something like that. You're going to want to build a good base, a good foundation to go into some strength blocks. You want to increase your hypertrophy, or you want to make your muscles bigger. You want to build your work capacity. You want to be able to come into the strength blocks, hit those heavier weights for 5s or 6s or 4s or whatever you're going for. Be able to recover a little quicker between those sets. It's also going to help with tendon integrity or soft tissue integrity. Constantly hammering your soft tissues, your tendons and your ligaments with really high intensities, things over 90% over and over and over. For one, it's not really building anything, and for two, it's really hard on your joints, as you guys probably know from doing it yourselves. It's like, as powerlifters, we like to lift heavy weights, so we tend to kind of redline that heavy weight a lot. As I've gotten older and more experienced, and through coaching people, I've gotten less stupid, and definitely helps when you have the foresight to know what that does to your body, and just be a little bit smarter with your training. Anyways, wanted Erin to kind of take over because she is an athlete. She's not a coach, so I'm sure she would have good questions that maybe you guys would have about doing that. Things like adaptive decay, like doing the same things over and over and over. At some point, you're going to regress, like doing a low bar squat, for 2 years straight. Like, at some point, like your body's like, I don't want a low bar squat anymore. I don't like these angles that you're putting this weight on my back and on my knees and on my butts. I'm just not having it anymore. And you'll notice you'll start to regress, or you'll get injured. So
something else that you made me think of when you're talking about that is it might be beneficial for you to get into building a solid base and a better foundation if you are doing top singles or top doubles and you're just gassed and fucking done after one set. You probably need to look into building that back up and building a better base, because yes, the more advanced you get, it can be very taxing to hit a top single, but for most people, you should be able to hit a couple sets of those and recover and do some accessory work after that. If not, you probably need to work on that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We see a couple of our guys at the gym that definitely could work on building that base and maybe doing, like you have, more hypertrophy work, work capacity. So something that I want to touch on is I recently did a strongman meet about a month ago. And I tell you what, if Nick had not gotten me prepared and built me a base and had my work capacity to the point it needed to be, I would have lost. Like, the last 3 events in that meet won me the meet because I was more conditioned. I had a better work capacity built up than anybody else. So it is very important, no matter what sport you're in, Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman, it carries over to any sport. You've got to have that base. You've got to have that work capacity. I don't really have any questions yet, but just hammering the importance of any sport you're in, that needs to be a priority. And there's got to be different seasons for strength, hypertrophy, but you've got to make sure that your off season, you're putting that work in.
Yep. Yeah, I remember one of the guys at the gym. He's not one of the ones that like has a shit capacity or anything, but I remember he was kind of complaining about his coach's program, and I was like, "Well, can I look at it?" Of course, naturally, I'm like, "I'm gonna see it," and I was looking at it, and I was like, I mean, it was laid out for a few blocks, which is not how I do. I mean, I do it like for my people, but I'm not going to show them all 3 blocks. But I'm
Right.
looking at it and I'm like, this is actually smart. And he's like, but none of it's like, specific. And I'm like, well, when are you going to compete again? He's like, probably not till November. I'm like, November of next year? Brother, yeah, no, why would you want, yeah, what? And also, like, what is the competition? How do you know what the comp's going to have? Like, it's strongman, right?
Right.
So you don't know. It's not like a powerlifting meet where you're going to squat, bench, and deadlift. You have no idea what those events are going to be until you enter into that comp. And they list off all of the events. So you really don't know what you're going to train for. So what his coach was doing was still building strength, but through a lot of variations that he's probably not going to do in competition. And so it really is just giving him time away from things that he's been doing over and over, for months, and just giving him new variations, new stimulus to his body, just things that he hasn't done, working through weak points and
Mm-hmm.
building more muscle. And I was looking at it, I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like just one coach to another. I think your coach is right.
Yeah.
You're just kind of surprised, but yeah, no, it's definitely a good point. We see it all too often. I have friends they'll see what I'm doing and they're like, oh, I would die if I did that. And it's like, well, that's because you haven't done it ever. Like, you don't just jump into that. Like, you build up to it.
That's not to
Um,
say it's not going to suck though. Like it definitely
it
hurts.
definitely sucks, and there's other ways to go about things, but like, I don't want to be the guy at the meet that by the time I get to deadlifts, I'm just gassed as shit.
Yep.
It's like that last comp was probably my least prepared I'd ever been, and I still felt okay going through deadlifts. It was
Yeah.
because it was, you build that work capacity over the years, and then you just keep hammering on it, and obviously, more advanced you get, the more specific you got to kind of remain most of the year, but that work capacity still matters,
Yeah. Say,
as
well,
you know.
I've got a question. Say I am somebody who knows I need to work on that and bring up my work capacity. What are some things that I can do to help just get me started in the right direction? Is there like one thing? Is there multiple things I could be doing? Are there certain movements, rep ranges?
Um, so it doesn't even necessarily have to be rep ranges. So like, you could do like a density style training. So let's say you were going to start a program at 3 by 10 at 60%, and then the next week you were going to go 4 by 10 at 62 and a half, and then 5 by 10 at 65%. Well, you could flip that around and go 10 by 3, 10 by 4, 10 by 5. It's the same amount of volume. You're further from failure doing it that way. It's a little more specific to, doing like powerlifting. Um,
Right.
but no, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can build work capacity, but you also want to remember that the most important principle of strength training is specificity. So you could build the work capacity cycling, but how is that going to help you in powerlifting or strongman?
That's a good point.
Like, it's going to build your cardiovascular, but like, it's not like you could build your cardiovascular doing a lot of other things that are more specific to the sport that you're training for. So specificity always has to remain a factor when you're building a program, regardless of how far from competition you are. Um, so like, trying to think of okay, like Thomas right now, one of our strongmen. He's a little bit newer, a little more green, but still, right now, because he's finally in an off season, I had him go through a block of mostly tens. I gave him some density work through. Now, when I say density work, I'm talking about timed sets of, like, the 10 by 3, 10 by 4, 10 by 5, things of that nature. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but that's how I did it for him. And then a lot of his like accessories and other lighter variations were done with just straight sets of 10, either with an RPE, or if I had a good idea of what would make hard but not overbearing percentages based on what we've seen in his training, then I'll do it that way, just because sometimes it keeps people from overshooting or undershooting. Like, I got another guy that works with me off and on, and he sees volume and he shits his pants. like if I give them an RPE or something. So at this point, I just give them a number, like based on a percentage, and then we just slowly build. Because otherwise, he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna die." And it's like, "No, you're not gonna fucking die, dude. Like, if you die from that, you are 10 ply. Like, you are so soft that you probably just needed to die. You were gonna die at some point anyway. Like, that's how soft you were. So you have to build up to it too. You can't just like jump into doing 100 sets in a week. Like that's just not. And it might not even be what you need. You know, maybe you're a really big, strong son of a bitch, and 100 sets. That's kind of like, well, maybe that's not the best use of my time. It's like, well, you're probably right, especially if you're 6'5", 350.
Right.
Like that's just, I mean,
it's insane.
Yeah, like when you're able to deadlift 950 pounds, it's probably not a good use of our time to have you do 50 reps at like a hilariously low weight. But you got to take in each individual as an individual. There are frameworks you can use, but when you get like more advanced, or like when you take on advanced clients that you haven't worked with, you gotta one, listen to them, listen to what they've done, and kind of work from there. But that was a lot. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Any of that? Okay. Do we want to move on to technique?
Yeah.
So technique, how important is it? Strategies to improve technique. Thank you, dear. I don't know why our light keeps turning off. I think it's overheating because it's a piece of shit. Strategies to improve technique. So technique is important. It's very important. But how your lifts, like how your deadlift is going to look compared to mine, it's going to be different because we're not built exactly the same. So some of the ways that you can improve it is, for one, like let's say you don't have a coach and you don't want to hire a coach yet. You can watch videos. You can find somebody with your anthropometry, like your limb lengths. Like you see someone and they've got, short stubby arms and long legs, and that's you. Well, I'm like, kind of, if they're a good deadlifter, watch their deadlift, see what they're doing. One of the ways I built my sumo was watching Death Grip Derek, because we have kind of similar builds. Obviously, he has much better genetics for powerlifting than I do, but the build's similar enough to where I was like, okay, I need to watch this guy's sumo, and I learned a little bit from watching him. And then obviously my old coach Gary. We don't have like that similar of builds, but the guy is just very, very good technical lifter. Watch very technical lifters. That's probably the biggest thing you can do if you're not willing or ready to hire a coach yet. Just think about some of the other strategies to improve tech. I mean, really reps. Like at the end of the day, you got to put the reps in.
Well, intentionality too. I have a bad habit of just walking up to the bar and lifting the weight, and I'm like, wait, that felt really good. I don't remember what I did, and then I'll try to replicate it, and it's different. So just being intentional and like really focusing on, okay, this is where I put my hands on my bench. This is where I put my feet in my squat. This is how I set up for my deadlift, and then just doing it the exact same way over and over. And then I guess just if you do need to make tweaks, making sure that it's not too close to a comp, or maybe it isn't an off season where you have time to build that back up. But yeah, technique, intentionality, I think is very important with that one, because that's something that I need to improve on.
Yep. Yeah, you'll notice a lot of the most common ones are like with deadlift, where people stand in relation to the bar. Mm-hmm. That can kind of throw them off sometimes, like they're where their feet are in correlation like with each other. It will be a little more narrow one day, a little bit wider the other, and then just for whatever reason they don't know they can move the bar into the position to where they need to be. And but squat is another one where you notice people change their foot placement quite a bit.
Yep.
Like narrower, wider, narrower, and you're just like, oh, I see the problem. Well, you're changing your stance width every single time you squat. And then with bench, the most common one I see is bar path, like where the bar is touching on the chest. It's like constantly different. And I'm just like, okay, well, are you changing your grip at all? He's like, no. It's like, all right, well,
Yeah. Well,
but
in
yeah,
technique, it can literally make or break whether you get the lift or not. And then, I
find
mean,
something and stick to it.
yeah. Well, it's also if you're changing your stuff all the time, like you're going to be a little bit more prone to injury as well. Like think about a
Yeah.
deadlift. Like if you're pulling the bar too far forward and you start lifting, that's low back. That's going to mess your low back up. Or if like we got a buddy at the gym and his deadlift is fine off the floor, but as soon as he gets it to his knees, it's like he just doesn't know how to lock it out. And I'm like, dude, you could have a solid 600-pound deadlift if you could just fix your technique.
Yeah.
Like the strength is there. So technique is very important. So making sure that that's a priority and you're really intentional with it, that'll help just put your total up there.
Yep.
Keep building on your total.
Just think of your arms as like a latch that you just latch onto the bar, and you want them to be as long as possible with your lats engaged, right? Protect your armpits. And then you're just leg pressing.
Mm-hmm.
Your leg pressing up. You're gonna stand up straight. You want that pattern to look the same. You want to see the knees stay forward, and as the hips are closing, you want everything to line up at the same time. Pop.
Just want everything to be really smooth. There's a lot of fit influencers out there who will do weird setup shit that's unnecessary and it causes you to use some unnecessary energy. So just kind of steer away from that. Just be very smooth with your movements, do everything right. Don't get into all that weird, I guess just lift it. Like just get your stuff right and lift it. There's no need for all that extra movement.
Yeah, just because the really massive strong men roll the bar doesn't mean you have to. I'm like, if you feel that you have to in order to get into position, okay, that's a great argument for it. But doing it just because you saw somebody else do it, it's just extra bar movement that's not necessary. Kind of like the hip bounce, the twerk,
Mm-hmm.
the twerk. Remember, you used to do that.
Yep.
And we got another guy that I think I've finally gotten that out of his system. But yeah, that one I'm just like, this is unnecessary movement.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you're a perfect deadlifter and then you start doing that and it doesn't mess with anything, great. But just adding in more variables,
Yep.
you know, it's like with mechanical stuff. When you're adding in more things that can break, it's like it's just unnecessary when you could just, you know, make it a gravity drain. You don't need the pump. Make it a gravity drain. And that leads me to keep it simple. Keep it simple. Force progression through volume first, intensity second. So that's one where it's like they'll see the workup of volume to get to like a 5x10 on all their main lifts and a bunch of accessory volume. You start getting overwhelmed. Well, it's like, yeah, if you're redlining every single set, like you're not gonna make it to that overall volume. And if you do, you're probably still really new, weak, not very big. No offense, you will if you stick to it. But yeah, when you're coming into that, you got to think like, okay, long term, how do I maintain this, right? So that first block might be where you're doing weights that just are kind of like hilarious to you, and that's okay. You're building your work capacity. That's the point of that first block, and then you can crank shit up in the next block and stay with the 10s or go to 8s or whatever your little heart desires. But you just remember, you're not going to be setting yourself up for success over a whole block by redlining it that first block. You need to set yourself at a point where you have somewhere to go.
So a tip that we kind of use, well, Nick actually kind of told me to use this, is in block one, or I guess week one. Always, if you have a number that you want to hit, it's better to undershoot that first week than to overshoot. And then by the time you get to week 3, if it's still okay, that's when you want to push yourself. But that first week of the first block, for sure, you want to make sure that you're undershooting rather than overshooting, if anything. Like it's always nice to hit it right on, but I mean, being realistic, that usually doesn't happen. So you want to go a little bit more on the cautious side.
Yep.
And that's helped me. There's been, when I first started working with Nick, there were multiple times where I couldn't even get through the last week of a block because I started way too heavy, and then technique would break down. I wouldn't get through my stuff, and it's not the place you want to be. So you want to start a little lighter so you can make sure that you can finish the whole block.
You'd be rushing your squat set
Mm-hmm.
and taking your time on your bench set. I'm just like, why don't you reverse those?
Yeah.
You reverse those.
Well, now there's a running joke at the gym where I take at least 10 minutes in between my stuff because you got to rest.
Well, that's usually closer to meet day. But
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna say. Um, oh, there's something you said there that reminded me of. I don't
Starting
remember.
lighter.
Oh yeah, so week one you're not diving head first. You're just getting your feet wet, right? So when you're going down to a really cold river or cold creek, you're just gonna put your feet in. All right, you're not gonna dive in right away. Week two, you're gonna challenge yourself. Week two, you're gonna push it a little bit more, and then week three is kind of full send because you want to make sure that you earn that deload. Now it doesn't mean you blow your whole wad on day one and then you can't finish the rest of your week. Um, but yeah, that week three is where you really hit that red line. You want to push it to where you're forcing your body to adapt to new levels. That's it, right?
Got to make sure you earn the deload. Give yourself a reason to want to deload.
Stimulus, recovery, and
adaptation.
So you want to give yourself something to adapt to. But that should not be week one. Week one's just getting your feet wet. You want to hit that light, that stupid light. I don't understand why this thing keeps going out. All right. Yeah, stick to the program, make changes after. So if you're building your own program, you write something out. Just try to stick to it. All right. Or like my people, if you're watching, any of my guys, I see when you guys go over the weights that I actually program. If I program percentages, please stick to those percentages. Those are there for a reason. So if you're going, 20 pounds over what I recommended, just know you're going to pay for it on week three. You're going to be like, oh my God, I couldn't finish. Like, well, why?
That's almost like
I already know the answer, but I want you to figure it out, and then you can tell me. So that way I'm like, okay, you understand what you did. Good. And then the last point we want to touch on is you're probably too small. Build more muscle. That's going to be true through most of your lifting career. I mean, that's kind of the basis, right? Is you want to build more muscle. Now, as powerlifters, you're not going to want to spend your entire year or season just building muscle, because you got to remember that at some point you need to transition those muscles from just you're training from just building muscle to then strengthening that muscle. You're going to want to adapt that muscle to higher intensities in order to get stronger. You're not going to build a whole lot of 1 rep max level of strength by doing 50 to 60% of your 1 rep max. But there will come a time where you're going to need to be comfortable with being a little bit more fluffy than usual, unless you're just one of those people that's just fluffy all the time. You'll probably be alright. But yeah, moving on. Yeah, this doesn't mean become a fat slob of fatty mcfat. Don't stuff yourself to the point where you're just. I mean, because we see that, right? Somebody will increase their numbers, and then you look at their dots. So as powerlifters, dots is kind of king. If you're getting to a point where your dots, your numbers are going up, but your dots is going down or staying the same, then hopefully you're doing that with a purpose to eventually turn that newly made tissue into something usable. But when it's just a lot of fat,
just kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, you could probably tone down the McDicks a little bit. Hold off on Chick-fil-A there for a minute. But for you skinny fellas like me, I've always been kind of a skinny guy, so I have to overeat. For you guys, you're just gonna have to eat and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's just the way that it is. You're gonna have to stuff your face. You have to drink the milk. You're gonna have to ignore the fat people telling you that McDonald's is bad for you. For you need those extra calories that aren't super nutrient dense, so they don't fill you up. that's something that I had to come to terms with. If I wanted to get bigger and stronger, I was going to have to, I'm not going to be able to eat clean and do that. Some people can. They were blessed for powerlifting or strongman, not so much for getting lean and sexy on stage.
Yep.
So there's going to be genetic, points to that too, but that, we're not going to get into here. But that's pretty much everything we wrote up for strength training fundamentals, building solid foundation. It's base building, technique, forcing progression through volume, and just getting bigger. Those are going to help. Do you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Nope, I think you touched on everything.
Okay.
If you have any questions, you can always reach out to Nick on IG or Facebook. You can always shoot him a text if you've got his number.
Yep. On IG, it's at bulletproof_systems or
at bulletproof
_strength _systems. Of course, somebody else already had the other one, even though it's my LLC. Mine. But with that, do better or else.